The Manhattan's one of the most popular and important cocktails of all time. Today I'm going to show you my absolute favourite recipe when it comes to a Manhattan. I'd also talk about some variations that can take it in slightly different directions. So, welcome along to Essential Cocktails. So the Manhattan's actually quite an interesting drink in that a lot of classic cocktails like the Manhattan have kind of changed and morphed over the years and been really open to interpretation, whereas the base recipe of a Manhattan's remained much the same. It's broadly accepted that it contains 2 parts spirit, 1 part vermouth and a couple of dashes of bitters, garnished with either some kind of citrus peel or a cherry, and that recipe is pretty much timeless and it just works really, really well. So when it comes to the whiskey base, a lot of people say, should I use bourbon or rye in my Manhattan? And personally I'd say the answer is yes. Whichever one you prefer, go with that one. I think a lot of people prefer bourbon, some people prefer rye, but whichever one you go with is going to be really delicious if you love that kind of whiskey. So we're not going to be too bound by tradition here. If you take a rye whiskey, it's going to be more spicy, a little bit more dry, perhaps a little bit more woody. Whereas if you go for a bourbon, it's going to be a little bit rounder, a little bit sweeter, and it's going to just have a slight impact on the final drink. You could blend the two together, that'd also be really delicious, or you could even ditch these all together and use Scotch whiskey, which would change the drink from being a Manhattan to being a Rob Roy. So today we're going to go with the rye whiskey because that's my personal preference and kind of what I feel like right now. But you could use bourbon and it'd be totally delicious. And we're going to pair that with our sweet vermouth. I'm going with Cocky Vermouth di Torino, which has got a really nice full body, enough kind of natural sweetness without being overpowering, and a little bit of complex herbal note in there as well. And I'm going to go with regular aromatic bitters from Scrappy's Bitters. But if you have Angostura, that'll work really well as well. When it comes to the garnish, I actually like to add a little bit of orange zest to the drink, but I also like to use a cherry for our kind of visual garnish. And there we have our ingredients from the Manhattan. So we're going to be stirring this down and let's start building it now. So into our mixing glass, we're going to start with 50 ml of our rye whiskey. And you want to have a look at the ABV of this. So if this is a 40% ABV, that's a slightly lower ABV than this, which is going to be 45%. So you just need to factor that into your dilution in your stirring. The higher the ABV, probably the more you're going to want to stir it down just to get a little bit more dilution. Otherwise it can be quite a powerful drink. So 50 ml or 2 parts of our whiskey. If you use bourbon, it's going to be different. If you use Scotch, it's going to be very different again. So don't underestimate the power of the whiskey because this really is the heart of the drink. I'm going to pair that with 25 ml of your choice of vermouth. And I really like the Cocky range. I think this is a really delicious vermouth. But experiment with different vermouths because the combination of the whiskey and the vermouth together is kind of the basis of this drink, so they do need to interact really nicely. And if you were to divide this 1 part or 25 ml into 12.5 ml each of a dry vermouth and a sweet vermouth, you'd be looking at what's called a perfect Manhattan, which is not my preferred way to drink the drink, but it is some people's, so you need to have that drink in your arsenal as well. We're going to go 3 dashes of aromatic bitters to bring a little bit of complexity to the drink, a little bit of spicy bitterness, and then we're going to stir the drink down over lots of ice. And when it comes to stirring, I'd aim for around about 20 to 35 seconds here, depending on your ice. So if the ice is fresh out of the freezer, you want to stir for a little longer. Also, if the ABV is higher in the whiskey, maybe stir for a little longer. Whereas if the ice has started to melt a little bit, or you've got a lower ABV in the whiskey, stir for a little bit less time. And as I said in my episode about ice and dilution, which I'll link above, which is from earlier in the course, you can actually measure your dilution and work out exactly how much water you want to introduce to your Manhattan to get your own perfect recipe. You can also experiment with different vermouths in the recipe. So if you were to introduce a Werner, this would make it into a black Manhattan, which is a really delicious mix. And you can actually bring in lots of other flavors, including coffee being one of them. And I actually explored this in full detail in this video above. We're going to strain into a chilled Nick and Nora glass or a coupe glass. And then to finish the Manhattan, I like to go with a double garnish, one of which for aroma, one of which for kind of taste and visual. So first of all, I'll take a little orange coin, just taking the zest off the orange, and we're going to express this over the drink, which is kind of optional, but I think this adds a little bit of freshness to the drink, kind of lightens the richness a little bit, which we're going to get rid of, and then we'll finish the drink with a boozy cherry, which is another classic garnish for a Manhattan. And there we have a whiskey-forward, timeless classic of a cocktail, which is called a Manhattan. Enjoy that, everybody.